So, Sarah, talk a little bit about why you were interested in this project.
Well, a lot of it is via Chloe, but as someone who definitely grew up in the church within the very charismatic Pentecostal purity movement, I never really knew that there was the opportunity for reconciliation between faith and sexuality. Didn't know that was a thing until I kind of stopped attending church or being part of a certain faith, I guess, and then started really exploring my femininity and what feminism was and what that meant, and then kind of weaving that back into a faith system and seeing that there was maybe an opportunity for that, which I'm still exploring. But
so what was it about that made you interested in this project then?
Just that that's kind of this project's mission, from what I understand, is it is reconciling that you can be a sexual being and be a spiritual being that even is explicitly Christian, not just like, oh, mother goddess of the earth kind of a thing, which is still great. I'm into that. Pagans, right on. But yeah.
So, gotcha. Talk a little bit about what were some of the messages that you got growing up that you would say were not so helpful for you, and what were the effects of your life as you were growing up?
Didn't know I had a vagina for a while. Didn't know what that was. No, really, I didn't know what sex was for a very, very long time. But I knew it was bad when I did know what it was. Well, when I heard the word, I knew it was bad, but I still didn't know what it was. I still didn't know what intercourse was, really. There was just, like I said previously, there was no room for that conversation, for asking questions. It was such a taboo topic. I remember being like 8, I think it was my 8th birthday, and I had all these friends over, and we were all from kind of different backgrounds, and we had this conversation about sex, and those of us who were like kind of in the church at 8, so Sunday school, said that, so what we thought that sex was something that only people who were in sin, even if they were married, did to procreate. Even within the confines of a marriage, sex was still a dirty word. That's all we knew. It was like saying fuck or something. Well, I guess, the two are synonymous sometimes. But, so, yeah, it was just the utter unknowing. Didn't know what it was. And then later on, when I did know what it was, I went to an ultra conservative Christian school where literally women were not allowed to be in ASB. I swear, the people who spoke at the chapels that we had weekly, it was just, they took advantage of the student population being these budding adolescents, and every single week the only conversation was about what not to do sexually. So you heard a lot about what not to do, and the only right thing to do was to do it when you're married. So that was all I knew of it.
So what effect did that have on you?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I never had a sex talk. I got my period and didn't know what it was. I mean, even on a very logistical level, I didn't know biologically what was going on with my body. It was not spoken of. So I guess when, I had a pretty serious boyfriend in high school, and I remember spending time with him, and then I was on the worship team in my high school, and I would go to his house, I would tell my mom, going to worship practice, and I would go to his house beforehand because he lived across the street from my school, and we would hang out, and then I would go to these worship team meetings, and I would just be weeping, just inconsolable. And I had various family things going on at the time, and everyone was like, oh, is it family stuff again? And I was like, yeah, sure. Because there wasn't room for that conversation with anyone. Even in a peer group, you know, even among friends, that wasn't a possibility. So it was just a burden. It was painful. And the thing about Christian culture, at least the Christian culture that I'm familiar with, is that there isn't even room to talk about that within a relationship. So you can't talk to your boyfriend about what you're going through because it's too dirty. Those words are too dirty to even say. So
there's no place to go.
No.
So what would that feel like in here?
Like I just felt kind of polluted. Like pregnant in a symbolic way with yeah, just this very dirty burden, I guess.
Yeah. So when did you begin to question that maybe this wasn't the way God would want you to feel, or that this wasn't the only way to be in relationship with the gift of your sexuality or your body or your desires?
I mean, maybe unfortunately, but the time that I really came to terms with my sexuality, I guess, it was when I was no longer part of a church or anything. So
did your sexuality have anything to do with you leaving?
Not really. Not really. It was more some other family stuff. And confusion, like maybe a little bit more theological confusion than specifically sexual confusion. But there was also, there was no place for the two to coexist. So it was like, if you're doing these things, or if you are questioning these things, then you're misinterpreting Scripture. That was the only option. But it was really just when I kind of went to college and separated myself from the really fundamentalist background from which I came, and started hanging out with people who didn't grow up in the church. And even though I went to SPU, I made friends for some reason with people who didn't grow up in the church. And I actually ended up feeling a lot of shame in that community as well. Like, I think someone was mentioning earlier, like, oh my God, you don't know what your vagina looks like? You know, that Sex and the City scene, like, well, here's a mirror, go into the bathroom. And, and that was mortifying to me because, you know, that's why I almost couldn't speak right now. It's still something I haven't really come to terms with, because for 20 years of my life, it was just taboo. So, yeah. It was really when I just started hanging out with people who did have these sexual pasts that weren't so horrifying, or they weren't ashamed of them, that I realized that this is maybe an okay thing. But when I saw that it wasn't like married to a faith base either. So it was kind of, once again, it reaffirmed that the two can't coexist. It was this secular world and this Christian world. Or rather, the secular world and this Christian world. So, yeah.
So, was there a time when you began to wonder if they could coexist? And if so, can you talk about that story for you?
Yeah, it was really taking a class in college, and I was a sociology major, and yeah, and poetry. Don't do that, kids. You'll be eternally unemployed. But yeah, I was taking the sociology of gender with Dr. Jennifer McKinney.
Yes.
Oh God, she's the best. She's the best ever. And we had this insane, amazing class where I was just bombarded with encouraging but also horrifying information, and so I was really like forming my, like I said earlier, my feminine identity, and but then I realized, like, oh my God, Dr. McKinney is a strong Christian. How does that work? I don't get it. And I still don't consider myself a Christian. I'm not part of a church. I haven't been since high school, but that is such a key, like, influential part of my growing up period, that I can never divorce myself from that part of me and that part of how I was raised. So it was really interesting to hear that there was that possibility and flourishing in that identity, you know. And so and that class wasn't on sexuality, it was on gender and gender identity and stuff of that nature. But just to hear that it wasn't so black and white, and that there was room for believing in a Christian God and also believing in a body that was sexual, and not having to make the two mutually exclusive. Based on what my understanding is of the Christian God, love God, love people. At least that's the basis from what I know. A God who condemns people for being or expressing, like, the most natural part of who they are doesn't work for me. So when I do have, like, my two roommates, two of my closest friends are Mars Hill goers, no offense to anyone who goes there, but I just see such a burden in them, even when they're deciding who they're going to date, that it's still, once again, there is no room for sexuality within their relationship, and they are constantly bogged down by working so hard to please God, that there's no room for pleasing themselves anymore, or for pleasing their partner. And I think, and not just sexually, but it's all interconnected, you know. To please your partner sexually and yourself sexually is connected with the emotional connection that you have with them and the spiritual connection that you have with them. So to see that part stifled is just really discouraging. So that is what I hope that God intends for a sexual relationship. And that's not to say also, I think it's hard when I do talk to people like this, it's like they have this idea that if you are a Christian who also thinks that sex can be okay, that it's like you're this wily, body, like, you know, out there naked person. And that's I don't think that's what God intended either, and I don't think anyone's arguing that. It's that there's a healthy and mature and connected way to do sexuality. And it is not necessarily within solely the confines of a marriage. It can be a monogamous relationship. It can even be maybe not a monogamous relationship. But if it's honoring to you and honoring to that person, how can it not be honoring to God?
So what would you hope for people who are kids, let's say youth and young adults who are growing up in the church? What would you hope for them to know about God and their sexuality and their bodies? Something other than the purity movement. Yeah.
Well, even for kids at large, even kids not within the purity movement or within a Christian community, I would just hope that there is open conversation that I never had, that from the moment that children are born, that they are born into homes with parents who understand that this is a natural part of humanity, and to not even, like, I can't even ever remember even asking a question because I was always too afraid to even ask a question. So if there's just that baseline of open communication that has to start with parents, and if you just kind of let that run free, I think you're good, you know, like, and there's also, you know, there's always that fine line of how much do you tell your kids, at what age is appropriate for certain information. But if they're asking questions, they're only going to ask questions that they can comprehend the answers to. And if there's that open line of communication to ask the questions, they're going to ask everything that they're comfortable with, and you're going to answer, and they're going to be okay with it. They don't have any concept of that's not okay. You're the ones as parents who give them that concept. And of course, wider culture does that as well, but that's where it has to start, is in the home. So that is what I hope.
So that open communication.
Mm-hmm.